Okay, we're back with taping with Hod Hudson again, his experience in World War II. And the part of the video that we just wrapped up was Hod was telling us in general terms what about the combat phase of his experience in World War II. And now, Hod, you were going to tell us about who served with you on your airplane? Who are the crew members and what their jobs were? A little bit. Were you going to tell us that?
Well, now, did we not on the start of the program?
I guess we did. You went through that?
Through, like, you know, I had
Okay.
a bombardier that flew overseas with me,
Okay.
and a co-pilot, and a radio gunner, an engineer gunner, and a tail gunner.
So was it a total of 5-man crew?
6.
6, because you make
Yeah,
6 pilot.
6, yeah.
Okay.
Now, in combat, then I had the addition of a navigator, because in the lead ship we carried a navigator. One of the main purposes of the navigator was to help the bombardier locate the target.
Okay.
Okay, like with us, you know, I knew the Brenner Pass area, that I knew that as well as I know the Red River Valley area here.
Okay.
But so we didn't need a navigator for navigating so much, but it certainly was a great help to locate the targets, because sometimes, if you could imagine, in the mountainous area especially, they were difficult to find.
Okay, so on you as a lead pilot, you had 7 crew total.
Yes,
But typically the B-25 would have 6.
yes.
Okay, that all makes sense. Oh, and you were going to tell us something now about one of your another fellow you worked with, right?
My
your
crew chief?
your crew chief and your assistant. And could you just briefly tell us what they did again?
Well, the main job of the crew chief and his assistants were absolutely to keep the airplane flying. The airplane would be parked on a hard stand, and they practically lived with that airplane, you know. So
Who did all the patching and all that?
you had a maintenance squadron when you were shot up badly that would take the airplane too. These guys would come and work with our crew chief and his assistant.
Okay, and so you explained about getting your airplane back to Pisa, and now you're going to tell us something else.
Well, after 3 weeks, then the airplane was ready to fly again, so I went back and got it. And they had where am I here? Oh, up there, okay. The service squadron up there had changed the left engine, the tires, the nose cowl, and patched a lot of flak holes. So he'd set up his camera, and he has this picture on the wall at his home in Philadelphia, and that's where he took the picture for me.
Okay, and you explained that his mother had, let me look at this. Okay, we've got it, there it is right there. And did you explain to me that this, okay, maybe it would make the most sense if you do you want to just read that entire thing, and then I think it'll make sense, Hod.
Sure. Starting right up here.
You're right.
Okay. Well, my crew chief, many years after the war was over, sent me this picture. And he said, I have a good picture of a B-25 bird, 009. That's as we call 009 affectionately.
Sorry.
I'm sending you the history of this picture is interesting. My mother sent me a picture of a B-25 Mitchell that was on the cover magazine section of a Philadelphia Sunday paper back in 1945, not knowing it was our airplane 009. I saved the picture all the time I was overseas. I now have it framed and hanging in my living room. The captain on the back says a B-25 somewhere over Italy. I think it was the day you flew it back from Pisa. The service squadron up there had changed the left engine, the tires, the nose cowl, patched a lot of flak holes. I set up my camera on a tripod and snapped the picture handling on the wall. It didn't come out too bad, but not as good as the original. That's it. Let me know what you think of the picture. You thought you might enjoy seeing it.
Wow. And you identified it because you said that it hadn't been painted yet.
The cowling, the left engine cowling hadn't been painted, and so that had to be the day I flew it back.
Wow. Okay.
Just a question about weather. When you were, weather's such a big factor for you on these missions.
Yes.
How often, first of all, you're in the mountains. Did you find sometimes that you had to abort a trip? I mean,
You know, the only mission that I had to abort because of the weather was the Zagreb in Yugoslavia, and I was leading 18 airplanes that day, and that's quite a trip for us all the way from Corsica across Italy, across the
is that five and a half? Was that 5.5 hour trip that
I
you
would
had?
think, you know, I would have a record of it in here somewhere, but
Yeah, and then you would have been trying to go over the Balkans too.
yeah. And so in that particular case, then we made a run on the target, and we had broken clouds under us. Not steady overcast, but a broken clouds under us. So I made the run, and my bombardier couldn't find the target. And so we circled back around again and made that run again and couldn't find the target. Now our alternate target was up the Adriatic a little further to the north. And so I had to make a decision then, do I try to make it up there, or do we have enough fuel to get home? And I made the decision then to fly home. And I didn't want a bunch of people scattered all over Italy as they were running out of gas going back to Corsica. So
Now, what did you do with your bomb load?
we brought it home.
Oh, so, that's always a little dicey.
It is, yeah.
But you got rid of your fuel, so the airplane is lighter. But you still have
Still
that
have
issue.
the bomb load.
Yeah. And one more question, was this all VFR stuff that you never found yourself?
On missions it was all VFR because, you couldn't see the fly formation in
Okay.
weather. And we never logged any instrument time at all in combat. I was one time when I was flying like second element lead behind somebody else, and instead of going back to Corsica, they headed more towards Rome. And so they were going into an overcast, and I didn't like that at all, so I peeled off with my squadron and headed back to Corsica. Those guys, none of them lost their lives in that, but they were scattered all over Italy where they, once they went into this, they certainly couldn't see the fly formation in that.
So you never heard of anybody in formation actually colliding with each other?
Well, I heard a lot of that from England with B-20, with B-17s especially,
Oh, really?
because they had a lot more weather to contend with than we did.
And would they fly IFR when they were bombing, or was that strictly visual too?
It had to be visual.
Okay.
Except, if, like that Choron bombing that I mentioned, maybe they tried some of that too. I really don't know what they did up there.
I see.
So the mission that got scrapped then, to Zagreb, then was that because of weather? You couldn't find the target?
Yeah,
Okay.
but that would be the only one that, like weather briefing. Now, of course, one thing about the Germans, they never let us know what kind of weather they had either. So, but we had some of the P-38s that were weather recon airplanes that would be checking the weather way out ahead, so.
Oh, okay.
Well, that accounts for that high percentage of success that your squadrons had,
It did, yeah.
90 to 100%.
And a lot of it, a lot of it goes to credit to Colonel Snuffy Smith. He when we weren't on bombing, we were training. Like the day before it was my turn to lead a mission, I would try to make 6 practice bombs run on a little island we had that was inhabited, and it's just like shooting free throws, or practicing for any sport.
So there was no shortage of bombs. In other words, you weren't worried about trying to
And
conserve your stuff because
well, those were practice bombs,
Oh, okay.
with just had a kind of a smoke explosion,
I see.
so you could tell
Okay.
when they hit. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But he really worked us hard on training, and at the same time, then when I would be dropping practice bombs, there'd be some guys that just got overseas that were flying off by wings and practicing formation flying. See,
Oh,
so
yeah, that's really important, Dan. When
Yeah.
you think about this whole picture. It's one thing to be in the action, it's another thing to be prepared.
yeah.
Well, yeah, and I think the other thing is, it must have, just by practicing, did it create that discipline where you guys would hold formation? Because I bet when that flak started, it was, you're probably just, survival instinct probably took over where you wanted to peel off, and
Yeah.
did you feel that kind of pressure? Like, hey,
When you see, actually, yeah, I'm almost ashamed of myself to say it, but I never felt that kind of fear. I was so locked up on my bomb run on a mission that didn't occur to me at the moment.
But among the other pilots, were there guys that broke down that couldn't?
The only incident I ever saw that a guy broke down was one of the gunners. And before a mission, then this one gunner that wasn't flying with me came up to me where I was the lead crew, where he came up to me and wanted to get off the mission. And boy, you could tell there was no reason that he shouldn't be off, because he just had the shakes so badly.
I would think, Pod, weren't you more secure within the formation? Then there wouldn't be an incentive for it peeling off. I mean,
Yeah.
you're much safer in the formation than flying out there solo.
Oh yeah. Mhm.
So I can't imagine.
Well, except Dick, that they could be in heavy flak.
Yeah,
And then-
but if they peel off, there's still.
The thing is with the heavy flak that you're in, where do you peel to? You're on your bomb run. You stay on your bomb run because that's your job to be in there. The minute or the second, I should say, that your bomb's away, then you do evasive action. And then as a lead crew, you peeled off, and these guys peeled off with you. So if the flak was above, you went below. If the bursts were below, you tried to get over, and that sort of thing.
So, okay, back to when you were flying along the front line there, where you had to fly parallel. I'm sure that seconds felt like eternity, but how long were you under heavy flak sometimes? I mean, how long could it last?
Well, that's kind of a good question, because it would vary so much. I would say 10 minutes would be the longest, probably, on something like that. When you were within range, because once, of course, that you let your bombs go, you headed back across into friendly territory.
Okay, before we go with the dedication, though, I would like to ask you some other questions that I think are important here. You're over there for a long time. Can you tell me about the being in touch with your family? How did that work?
Well, we always wrote back and forth. Now, one of the unfortunate things there, when I met my co-pilot's parents in Danville, Virginia, before we went overseas, and then back in those days, we didn't have a telephone yet, but my aunt and uncle had a telephone. And so I had given them their number and or name or whatever, how we did it. But when my co-pilot was shot down then, and you know, how do you correspond with them to tell them that chutes were seen coming out of the airplane? You don't want to build their hopes up too much. What do you do? In the meantime, then, when they never heard from him and never heard from him, well, then they contacted my aunt and uncle to see, you know, if they'd heard anything about our crew. Well, you know, that put my aunt and uncle in a heck of a position to go to my parents to tell them, you know, that, or to ask them those kind of questions. And so, you know, I never thought of that at all in that case before we went overseas, but certainly that put them in a tough position, and his parents. And so they never brought it up to my parents. They would just have you heard from Hod lately, you know, this kind of thing. And
So there was nothing. There was no such thing as a telephone call home. It was
No.
all. It was all mail.
yeah,
And
oh yeah.
And how frequently could you expect that you might get a letter or a package, or what? Did you even get packages?
Oh yeah, my mother sent cookies and things like that overseas, and well, I would think weekly, 10 days, periods like that. You know, you might get 2 at a time. You know,
And what was the time lag on something like that?
I can't
It
say.
must have been 2 or 3 weeks at least,
I
right?
would think so. Yeah.
Mail service is pretty good though, it sounds
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
considering. Mail must.
Well, you know, it's different for the Air Force, like on a base like that. You could imagine the infantry's
I see.
dug in a hole somewhere, that'd be a heck of a lot worse.
Gotcha.
That must have been huge for morale, though, to get the packages.
Oh,
through.
sure it was. Mhm. Well, one interesting thing was that my mother would send the Sawyer County Record. That was a paper that came out of Hayward. Well, everybody in our tent read the Sawyer County Record then, you know, and
Maybe they get their hands on it.
and you know how the gossip columns was somebody was visited who,
Right.
and there was one guy around Hayward did a lot of visiting. When my paper came, the question was, who did Nick visit this week? I don't even remember.
Now, this has nothing to do with what your situation, but you fast forward and you look at today, and don't you think your military guys are maybe emotionally at a disadvantage?
Oh, sure.
Because of the fact that now they're on the internet and there's too much stuff going back and forth from home.
Yeah.
Is that fair, or what do you think?
I do. I think emotionally it would be a lot easier to fight a war with less communications.
Well, you think it'd be more stressful on the families too, just because they're hearing.
Well, you see a smash, a killing on TV, and did that look like my son that just got it? You know, that kind of thing.
And I was even thinking about the personal communication, if they're on the internet, or if they've got a chance to talk to their families every couple of days or whatever.
Yeah, and then they don't hear from them.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there's so much.
Okay, just some general questions. You said except for those civilian primary instruction base, Blythe, that the food was okay. Your food was okay when you're in the service.
Except for Blythe.
Except for
See,
Blythe.
Blythe was a government contract school, and so they watched their expenses, and of course, you know, refrigeration was not adequate, so your milk always was you know on the verge of being sour.
Okay, so that's why I thought that when you talked about living on Sardinia, and you
Corsica,
had
yeah.
Corsica, and you had that local gal in the neighborhood, and her daughter they were bringing eggs, and were they bringing cheese and
No, eggs primarily.
eggs primarily?
Yeah, all just eggs.
Was that just to supplement what you guys already had?
Yeah,
Okay, so that was coming out of, you guys were just paying for that sort of out of your
we
pocket?
were. Yeah.
Okay. Did you ever eat any other local food when you were on Corsica?
Well, you know, that all came out of the mess hall.
I did.
And so primarily I remember flying down to Sardinia. I didn't, but with airplanes down there to pick up food. Now maybe that was more of a central Army Air Force area, you know, where they picked it up too.
Did you have anything that you had with you for good luck? Anything that you kept in?
I didn't know.
None of that baseball player thing where you're tying your shoes a certain way to.
No, I don't recall anything like that.
Did some of the other fellas have their?
Well, I don't recall any discussion on it.
Okay. Okay. Will you tell us just a little bit about? We're
The only
going.
other question I
Go
might
ahead.
have is, did you have chaplains on base, and how did the pilots do their thing with that?
Yeah, we did. And, you know, it was an interesting thing with that. I really, I had more association with our what you called it, the physician, but I can't, Dr. Hamilton, flight surgeon is the term I was trying to think of. And,
By the way,
but
excuse me, is there one flight surgeon for
for a bomb squadron.
or for a squadron?
Yeah, so for in a group, you had 4 flight surgeons.
These are all medical doctors?
Yes,
And where did they have a clinic there that they
Yeah.
operated out of?
out of a tent, yeah.
They had a field hospital probably.
Yeah, the field
Could they do,
hospital
could they do
someplace.
surgery? Could
They did everything they
They
could.
did, okay,
Mm.
okay.
I went to rest camp with Dr. Hamilton, and that's in my Cork Creek story, I think.
Excuse me.
But he was a man, you know, about 50 years old then. And 2 bombardiers and I went to rest camp at Cons in the Riviera with him at the same time. And so he asked me on the way up then if he could bunk with me. And it was kind of interesting then. Then we had a banquet when we were there. And the girl I was dating in France then, her mother came along with him.
Now, is this a gal you met on this trip, or you had met her prior?
No, just on this trip.
Okay.
Yeah. Her
What-
picture is in there too
Okay,
somewhere.
and give me a date on that roughly. On your-
March of 45.
Okay,
And but it was kind of funny, you know. This Dr. Hamilton was a real nice, straight-laced guy. There was no hanky-panky or anything involved with that. There wasn't in my case either, but you know, I might have had some ideas.
I'm sure it's pretty normal.
But anyhow, it was fun because he asked me to bunk with him. These 2 bombardiers were real good guys, but both of them were a little louder, and I think he was looking for a little more quietness.
I gotcha. So getting back to that question of,
Oh yeah,
The chaplain thing.
chaplains. Yeah. Well, you know, I can't say that I even can picture a chaplain.
okay,
Now, I know they were there, and I know that this association went on with religion, because we had what we called an outdoor theater, where we had a bunch of frag bomb boxes set up, and they would hold services there.
okay.
Now, I never went to any services
Mm-hmm.
in that field at all. I really, you know, but I remember one case where this buddy of mine flew in. That was that Gene Stocking that I spoke of earlier, that I flew with the first mission, and he had gone to Sicily, and he picked up 3 girls in Sicily, then brought them back to Corsica.
3?
And yeah, and once the chaplain got a hold of that, those girls were on the boat back to Sicily pretty fast.
Wrecked all that fun, huh?
Yeah, And, but it was kind of funny with that, you know, he never got in trouble with that at all. But if that had been any other pilot except a lead pilot with a good reputation, it could have got a lot more serious.
I see.
Yeah.
Um,
But
So
it-
they're, so
but I know-
fraternizing with women among the crew, that would happen only on leave? Or
On rest
did-
camps
or
yeah,
was-
there
or
was
did some-
Corsica, I knew of no interchange between gals and guys on Corsica, except for the blacks, and
Black pilots or black
no ground troops.
ground
Yeah,
troops?
we had a guard squadron that, you know, that were black, and supposedly they had some things going with some of those Corsican girls.
I see.
All our activities in that area ran more into when we were Rome at rest camp or Isla Capri or Cons of the Riviera, that kind of thing.
The infantry had a little different access point than
Yeah, well, they weren't infantry; they were Air Corps.
security.
But
Oh, they were
were-
Air Corps?
yeah,
They were flyers?
No,
But
they
they
were
were
ground
Ground
troops,
crew?
security,
I see.
guard squadron.
I see.
Yeah.
on the subject of on the black soldiers, did your escorts? How often did you were there some missions that you did have? Did you always have escort fighters with you, or
Almost always until the very end of the war, when the Germans, you know, had moved most everything back to Germany, where they were fighting the tail end of the war for them.
did you ever have any of the Tuskegee Airmen or the red? They call them the Red Tails. Did
You
have
know,
those
we
guys?
think we did, but we don't know that for sure.
Okay, now in that magazine, that one of your fellows friends, the unit, wrote up the Corsica. What is it called again? The Corsica,
The old Cork Tree
the
community.
Cork Tree Community.
Yeah,
I was reading in there how about where you guys had those pickup football games, right?
sure.
And was there somewhere in there also about playing poker?
Oh yeah, we played a lot of poker.
Was that a lot of the entertainment?
Yeah.
What other kind of entertainment?
Cards were a lot of entertainment, sure.
And that's how you passed.
And we did have a ping pong table. You know, we had a club that when I say we, I didn't build it, but we had a club where we had our meals and everything. And there was a, you know, homemade bar in there, and we had a ping pong table, that kind of thing.
Do you have any movie reels, old movie reels?
Yeah, and like I mentioned, the outdoor theater I spoke of,
Okay,
where
okay.
they'd held church services.
Mhm.
Yeah, then they would show movies there.
Okay.
How about music? Did anybody have a phonograph
Yeah,
there?
yeah, there were a lot of talented musicians within the group as pilots, navigators, bombardiers, and so forth.
Oh, and they just played.
Yeah, they played.
Good.
So, yeah.
How about your sax player? He played. Don't
Well,
remember.
see, I lost him.
Oh,
Then
you
he
did.
was in the next squadron.
I see.
And so outside of occasionally seeing him at a briefing, you know, I never saw him again. You know, he gave me some pictures, this and that, of him and his squadron.
Well, okay, so these guys liked reading your hometown newspaper. Were there other reading materials there? Any books coming in?
Yeah, you know, the,
USO bring in books?
yeah, well, we had Red Cross
Oh,
girls.
Red Cross.
And the Red Cross girls served us donuts and coffee after every mission. So the first thing we did when we come back from a mission is sit down at a group of tables where we had interrogation, and a intelligence officer would interview crews. Then, like lead crews, we would be interviewed, and the Red Cross would serve us coffee and donuts.
And they were Americans?
Yeah.
But they weren't enlisted people.
No, they were Red Cross.
They must have had a little bit of independence vis-à-vis the pilots and so on. I mean, no fraternization with the Red Cross?
Oh, you bet.
There had to have been.
Yeah, oh, yeah. I've got another picture that I got in here somewhere of a Red Cross girl with our colonel. She was a little older, so.
I'm
you know,
sure that
she-
they were, yeah, they had their own little, was that true all through Europe, that these girls were available at different bases and so on to do exactly what they were doing in your situation?
Yeah, Red Cross.
This
yeah.
is a common thing then?
Yeah,
It was in all services?
yeah, I would think so.
That must have been a huge number of people, quite a significant number of people across a war. Anyway.
Okay, just on let's talk a little bit more about the entertainment then. Did you ever see any of the professional entertainers that got sent over? Any of those, like Bob Hope and
Yeah.
Jack
like
Benny?
Bob Hope was in Africa, but I didn't see him. No, this wasn't an entertainer, but Doris Duke, you remember the Duke family,
Yeah, yeah.
tobacco family? Doris Duke came overseas, and, I would think she was in her mid-40s or something like that. And the only guy that got entertained by her was General Knapp, as far as I know. I remember he
General.
brought her along to a mission briefing, and Colonel Smith, he couldn't talk without his vocabulary being pretty rough, and he couldn't hardly talk at a briefing because with Doris Duke in the briefing, it was kind of embarrassing for him. When we're off the air, I got to tell you more about him, but I don't want to record that.
Okay, so, but anyway, we hear about those big USO shows, and your outfit and you guys, you never really got in on that.
Well, some did,
Oh, they did?
yeah.
Was
but
that part of that just timing, being in the right place at the right
It
time?
would be, sure.
Okay, so then how about your regular leave that you guys took? You said that did you get to the Riviera and
We got, we had rest camp.
okay.
And so primarily, if you'd had a run of bad missions or something like that, that you'd go to rest camp. With me as a lead pilot, with carrying 5 lead pilots in a squadron at a time, I did a lot of flying into Rome with people and then flying the next load back to Corsica again. We had 3 rest camp hotels in Rome. And the Isle of Capri was a rest camp. You flew into Naples and then they went on a boat out to the Isle of Capri. At Cannes on the Riviera was kind of reserved for what you'd call senior officers at that time. And so I got up there, of course. But
were these fun places to be?
oh yeah, Cannes was great.
Did you?
That was my first introduction to mini bathing suits.
They were way ahead of us in Europe.
Oh, they were way ahead, yeah.
Did so? How many days leave would you get in a situation like that?
In the neighborhood of 3,
3 days?
yeah. I maybe
pretty short.
Cons, I think maybe was more like 5 or so, but
Well, did everything was it the food and the drink and it was much better than
yeah, everybody had their own thing, then like the rest camp hotels had a lot of local females hanging around there.
Wait for the GIs to come in.
Yeah.
how expensive did the dollar go a long ways
Well,
on the local economy there?
Well, it depended on, like there was certain amount of black market went on. And so cigarettes, for instance, I didn't smoke at all. I traded my cigarettes for candy bars, other guys. Now, there was a lot of cigarettes used for many other purposes with female crowds and so forth. And, you know, I can't remember that, you know, the rest camp was all for free, of course, the hotels and everything, the food, everything there. So it would only be if you bought something if you went out away from there. And so different people bought different things, you know.
Okay, so as far as when you had that sort of contact with the civilians, was Italy out of the war at that point in time already? We're already in 19.
Well, Italian men, you know, my opinion of Italian men, and maybe this shouldn't be, but they were kind of spineless. You know, it seemed to be that they weren't around. You know, I don't know what they were doing.
But Italy had dropped out of the war by that time, I believe.
Well, you know, I suppose with Mussolini and some of his troops. See, Mussolini was
Killed on his way out, trying to escape.
Yeah, and he and his girlfriend, I guess, and where they were hung in the streets of Milan, as I remember.
Yeah.
So I guess where I
But
was,
then there was a new premier who took over, and of course he immediately surrendered to the Allies. And then bingo, of course, the rest of the story is when you were over there, that Mussolini episode, did you arrive after the death of Mussolini and the bombing, or were you there?
I really can't connect on that, right?
Okay,
I
because the
just
Germans at that time pretty much took over the Italian campaign.
They
Right.
had, yeah,
As soon as Mussolini was out of the picture.
yeah.
and it's in the book here. So that book that I handed you, that would tell us exactly when Italy got out of the.
Sure.
Well, I got it right here. I got it right here in the encyclopedia.
Oh, yeah.
Well, then tell us.
I mean, basically,
Well, just tell us when Italy was out of the war.
basically,
The reason I'm headed where I'm headed with that, Hot, is I just want to ask you what the Italian people, was there any anti-American feeling or no?
Sure. The north end of Italy were very fascist. The only friends we had there was the let's say future communists, maybe, partisans, as we call them, friendly Italian partisans, and they were ones that helped down airplane pilots and so forth. Like one of my good friends, Merchland was his name, he lived with an Italian family, sleeping in the attic and hiding out for 4 months or something like that.
Okay, but how about when you were on Capri or when you were in Rome?
Okay, down there they were very friendly to
Friendly.
us. It was more the north ones. The more successful ones were the more fascists.
How about in France? What feeling did you get from those people?
Well, of course, when I was at Consul Riviera, that's a great area for
Resort area, right?
yeah, and as a result, really, they were just catering to us there, you know. So one of the things supposedly that they didn't like were bombardiers, because they thought the bombardiers were responsible for you know, dropping their bombs maybe in wrong areas or something like that. But I don't know how. I never saw anything of that. I just heard it.
well, I got the exact date of the surrender, which is August 19th, when Marshal Badoglio established contact with Eisenhower to negotiate a surrender without the knowledge of the Germans.
August 19th, what year?
But that's a problem. Like, you know, the campaign was 43 to 45, and it
I would
doesn't
say
give you
that would have been 44.
44, August 19th.
I would think so.
Okay,
Well,
because it doesn't give us exact.
here-
Well, it wouldn't be 45 because, of course,
Yeah,
the war
so-
was over.
Right,
So it
he's
had
right.
to be
August
44, I think.
Yeah, he's got it. Because the campaign is 43 to 45, so August 19th, 1944.
Well, it looks like they may have already gotten rid of Mussolini by. Is this possible by 43?
No, they got.
Could have been if it was 43 then, but
No,
yeah.
no, well, they were, okay, here's what
Anyway.
it says, Churchill now urged an invasion of Italy, which he asserted was Europe's soft iron belly. Roosevelt proposed a landing in southern France, but capitulated to placate his air chiefs who wanted bomber bases in Italy. The invasion commenced in September 43. Montgomery took Reggio and Toronto and moved up. Americans landed at Salerno and moved against Naples. January 44. I'm not seeing it. I'm not seeing
I
it.
don't know
I'm
what's that
not
for.
seeing where Italy's out of the war, but we know they.
Well, it's August 19th is a surrender, right here, it's got the date, the Italian
Okay.
surrender.
Okay, August 19th, 44 probably. It must have been. Okay,
So where did that put you in terms of your date? If that was a surrender, August 1944,
my first mission on August 22nd.
okay, just a few days, a couple of days afterwards.
Yeah, and that'd be on the invasion of southern
Yeah.
France at what we called Toulon Harbor.
Okay. And then, of course, that's when, in fact, you know, even slightly after the surrender, the German army reacted very harshly toward the Italians because they didn't surrender in one day. The troops were all surrendering over a period of time, plus the naval, plus the Italian Navy. The Germans were actually bombarding the Italian Navy and going after the Italians
they didn't trust them.
after that surrender.
Right.
So.
Okay, so any other humorous events or stories you want to tell us about Hod? I bet you have lots of them that happen, but anything that just sort of stands out.
Well, actually, to do that, I'd have to take the mic off.
Yeah. But so.
Oh yeah, okay,
Yeah,
so we'll
so
pass
let
on
that
that.
go.
Yeah.
All right. So you didn't keep a diary,
No.
but you ended up with all these photographs. How did you end up with photographs?
Well, the combat missions photographs are the targets that I have with me. I got from one of the guys that worked in photography in the squadron.
Yeah.
And other pictures, you know, we took of different events, like Christmas, holiday, Christmas dinner, holiday.
Cork Tree community. Was there one guy in the unit that would like to take pictures?
No.
Oh.
Normally, those pictures that were taken of events were taken by photography group, and then we got the pictures from them.
Did you have any real characters, the Billy Wakefield types,
Yeah.
in that squad? I mean, that you can remember any type of characters that were full of bluster and storytelling?
Well, you know,
Or what?
first, like if somebody came in that was quite a hot rod, for instance, after he got shot at a few times, he was not a hot rod anymore. He was just one of the guys. You know,
Okay.
that combat and getting shot at had a lot to do with taking a lot of
Cooling it
that
down.
stuff away. Yeah. This Bill Ingram that we spoke of, that was my best friend all through there. Bill was a real comedian.
Okay.
And he was a great help in training in combat because he was so funny, you know.
Yeah.
He was a very good singer, very good entertainer. And so that was a great help to me going through cadets.
Can we get a quick picture of him? Because he's the guy that you said you're real close to. There the folios right there, Hod.
Oh, yeah, okay.
And-
Yeah, well, this would be the best picture we'd have.
Because Hod was telling me about how it just was a coincidence, but the washout rate was pretty high in all these different phases of flight. And we were throwing numbers around, and the percentage was quite high that didn't make it through the final 3 or 4 phases of flying training. But here was a fellow that went all the way through with Hod, and then they thought you thought you were going 2 different places, right?
Yeah,
And somehow they both
ended up in Corsica.
Corsica.
Yeah.
And maybe you want to tell the story about that when you left each other and where was it, South Carolina?
Yeah.
And you're getting your marching orders, and then how did you end up running into each other again?
Actually, when I got to combat then, and so I was in my tent, maybe my tent area, for first hour I was there, and here Bill Ingram found out that I was there, and he was at my tent. And the last time we'd seen each other is when we come back on a troop train from Sacramento to Columbia, South Carolina. And then he was moved to Greenville and trained, and I stayed at Columbia. So then he went overseas before I did. So he was an old combat pilot when I got there. He had maybe 2-3 missions in, you know.
Wow.
So I could find out what it's like to get shot at, you know. But there he was. And he became a boat pilot after the war on the Delaware River and navigated huge liners,
Oh, okay,
freighters up the river, oil tankers and so forth.
okay.
So I was in contact with him. He came, well, first he came to our farm in Wisconsin when I was just out of the service in 46. And then, no, 47 is when he was there. And then, you know, we hadn't heard of each other for a number of years. And then I got a call from him one day. And so I visited him out in Deer Island, Maine. And this is where he had his summer home. He lived in Philadelphia with his job. Of course, you know, that was a great high-paying job that, you know, boat pilots, they got paid very well, you know.
Mm-hmm.
I remember when I was out there, I think he was putting in his keel plan like $36,000 a year. You know,
Wow,
so,
wow.
And so I do have a picture. Am I hooked up yet?
Yeah. We're,
Right there.
I'll grab
With that
in that-
sailboat.
this one or
Yeah.
the black one?
The
Grab
sailboat.
Grab the sailboat. No,
The
it's right on
sailboat.
top. It's on top deck.
Oh, this one.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. That was when I went out to visit him, and oh, this is me running the sailboat then. Or at least having my picture taken like I was running it. This is the sailboat we were on.
Oh, yeah.
That didn't belong to him, it belonged to a friend of his there.
And that was the boat you're on.
Yeah, that's a sailboat, yeah.
Wow. Well, it's beautiful.
And this is a picture of me running it.
Oh, yeah.
Wow. Hod, you were explaining one reason that you guys ended up being good friends, or was because, okay, so you went,
In the alphabet you're speaking?
yeah, alphabet. Tell us
Yeah,
about that.
well, see, in the service, you kind of go by alphabet, everything you're doing. And so I was, am I
Yeah.
on what?
Okay.
Well, I was always, of course, in the H's, H-U-T, so I was about the last H's and his name was Ingram with an I, and there were very few I's. So Bill and I ended up roommates as cadets. And when I say roommate, someplace earlier in cadets, you were in a you know, upstairs or downstairs, whatever, in a barracks. But then our beds would be right next to each other or close. And then as you moved along in cadets, I think you maybe had 4 guys to a room, and then later 2 guys to a room in the last phase or so. And Bill and I then were always roommates. And then, of course, we trained in B-25s together in Mayfair Field, Sacramento, California, and then following that, ended up back on the troop train into Columbia, South Carolina, and then Bill was moved to Greenville, South Carolina for his training. So we weren't together anymore, and then we got together again on Corsica. So he lived in, he was a, yeah, as time went by, you realize, you know, all of us went in, flew a few missions as co-pilot, and then moved up the line. And so Bill became a lead pilot in his squadron when I was a lead pilot in mine. So this was coincidental, but then he became General Knapp's personal pilot after he finished his tour. He went to Tunis then, and so then I went home before he did because he ended up, you know, there for a while before.
Sound like he got a plum job there for a little while with the general.
Well, you know, it was, yeah. There's a lot of pressure with jobs like that. You know,
Yeah, I suppose.
you can imagine, you know, the guy, you couldn't find a nicer guy than General Knapp to fly with. But, you know, you didn't know where you were going to be going the next few minutes. And it's kind of
Okay.
like being a charter pilot, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. But
By the
this
way,
is a-
one question, go ahead, you were gonna say something.
This
Go
is a
ahead.
picture of Bill that you wanted
Yeah,
to take.
I want to see both your pictures in there now.
Yeah, okay.
So, here, let's just,
Can
okay.
you just point to
I know
Bill
where Hot
first?
is, because he
Is
showed me.
Bill up here?
Yeah,
Yep, he's there, so, okay, so, just a second. All right, so there he is.
Bill, name his name.
Okay, that's Bill Ingram from Delaware. Okay, then Hod's down here, Dick, right? There's Hod right there, from Hayward, Wisconsin. See him? Right here.
Oh, okay.
Right. Great, thanks. So,
I need to get hooked up again.
so Hod, it was also roommates, but you guys, were you saying that even when you guys were in formation, sometimes you'd be standing next to each other? Is that right?
Oh, yeah.
Because you're just, because there you are, in the alphabet together.
Now, if you wanted to put those pictures, anything, I brought this along that shows Bill passed away in August of 2001 at Deer Isle, and
Who sent you that, his wife, or?
actually, this is what I wrote reporting to our Bomb Wing magazine of his death.
Okay. Well, we're gonna include that then, if you want to.
Yeah, sure, that's
Great.
good.
Okay.
Just a little question about the washing out process that you went through in your training.
Yes.
First of all, it may be erroneous and not pertain to you, but you've got the story about air sickness and Campbell. And
Okay.
so now, let's go back to your training. Did you have some pilots that were kind of removed because of air sickness or because of?
You know, I don't know of any, but that certainly could have been a problem. Like Blythe, California, in June and July, it was very hot and rough air, and so certainly that could have been a factor.
Okay,
Now with Paul, he fought that all through cadets, and it didn't bother him when he got into the heavy bombers, it seemed. But he flew with me to Devil's Lake after, you know, I moved to Grafton in 51, 52, and he got airsick again flying to Devil's Lake with me.
yeah, so it's unusual that maybe having that situation that you'd actually manage to get through the early
It is,
stages. You'd have to be
To
a
fight
little
that
lucky.
all the way
Fight-
through must have been hard for
Yeah,
Paul.
yeah.
Now Paul is, you know, exceptionally intelligent guy. You know, you know, Paul's in the rest home now, and he's out of it. He doesn't know what's up anymore. But Paul could tell you just about every veteran around Grafton, their age, where they came from, what theater they were in, what they did when they were there.
Oh,
You know,
really?
he was heavy into the Legion,
Okay,
and you know, Paul was an amazing person, really.
Yeah.
Yeah. And now he's just kind of like a vegetable.
Too bad.
so now, in going further with this washout process, where did most of these cadets fail? if they failed and got washed out of the
In the
early
first phase of flying, which would be primary.
primary?
Yeah.
Okay,
45% of our class washed out of primary.
and primary would be up to what? Don't
That
tell
would
me.
be 6 weeks, that would be the first 65 hours.
Oh, the
flying.
first 65 hours of
Yeah.
flying.
And so primarily I would say, you know, a certain amount of that would become before ever soloing out.
Oh, really?
I would think so.
Oh. They could just,
You know, and I said to Dan earlier, a lot of those that washed out then became bombardiers or navigators or fighter or bomber gunners.
okay,
And so my bombardier that I had all through combat that was tremendous, he'd washed out in basic, so he'd had more than 65 hours. So
oh,
he washed out in the next phase, which was
I see.
Yeah.
What would get you in the second phase?
inability for night flying and instrument flying, probably.
Okay.
Now, you realize all these guys had to be pretty sharp to be on a cadet program in the first place.
Mhm.
So, you know, it was a very difficult thing for them to be eliminated.
Okay, yeah, I bet you it was.
Yeah. A certain amount, you know, like when I started, later on, you just had to be able to apply for pilot training and pass the tests to get in. When I started, you had to have at least 2 years of college, like Paul was the same way as I was. And he didn't have 2 years of college either, so he had to take this mental test first
Okay,
and to qualify. And then, of course, they give you a physical right away to make sure.
so that as they needed more pilots, they dropped that initial requirement.
They did. And they started a college program that was a 5-month period where you went to a college and, you know, so that was what we call pre-flight.
Okay,
Yeah. And that's where they got introduced primarily to flying with a J3 Cub as far as the ones that I was, but I was ahead of that program.
I see.
So I never, that was into the later part of it.
Was that the program Dad was flying in
You know,
Wisconsin?
You know, I can't say. I know that he was training pilots, you know,
Mhm.
but I just don't ever remember having a discussion with him in what phase. I
Okay.
think at, you know, White Bear Lake, does that ring a bell at all?
Mm-mm.
Out of St. Paul? I know, you know, like he was in the flying business at Shell Lake
Yeah,
after that. But you see, as far as I know, when I was like a sophomore in high school, I don't mean a sophomore in high school. No. In grade school, I became aware of your dad because he was teaching at Twin Lakes School out of Hayward.
I see.
And I competed against his students, or a student maybe of his, in declamation and that would be like speech in those days.
Mhm.
They had declamation and oratory, and those two. And so, like, I know when I was in the 5th grade at the Jordan School then, that I had to go to Hayward High School and make my speech, so to speak. That declamation is the way we called it then. And that was 8 minutes. That place was bigger than Yankee Stadium to me.
Oh, yeah.
To get, you know, in that high school to
Oh, yeah.
get on that. And but at that particular time, your dad had students in. My teacher was August Simonson at that time, and when you drive from Hayward to Stone Lake, you go by Wendigo Lake,
Okay,
and that was their resort and farm then.
I see.
And so then when I was like a sophomore in high school is when I played baseball with Stone Lake with your dad. And that is, to me, is when he was starting to take flying lessons.
Okay,
Jack Spalding, as far as I know, was his instructor at that time out of Rice Lake.
okay,
And now as time went by, you know, I wasn't aware of your dad. I was aware of your mother because then she started teaching at Jordan School.
Yeah,
But of course, in my case, then
you were long gone.
yeah, I was probably down at Eau Claire as a freshman when she started there. And so then I wasn't aware of your dad at all until he landed in my uncle's field where we were putting up hay and found out that he had a flying service in Devil's Lake and he had a job for me if I came out. Now, I had signed up with American and United Airlines, so had 200,000 other people, you know. And so, like Dan said, why don't you come out and fly for me to hear something from the airline? I haven't heard anything yet. So
I see, gotcha.
so that, you know, so I came out there in the fall of 48. So the first spraying I did would have been the spring of 49.
I see,
Yeah.
gotcha. Well, you want to tackle that on another little visit.
Sure, we will.
Okay, so let's talk then. All right, so you guys have been reassigned and you're actually flying out of Italy. And then just to close on that phase of it, Todd, when did you know, what was it like then that day that you got the word, or when did you get the word that, okay, you're not flying missions anymore?
Yeah, well, the war ended, then like in the first couple of days of May, as I remember. I couldn't say exactly.
In 45, okay.
Yeah. And so at that particular time then, immediately we started training for going to the Mideast. Only in my particular case, I was high in missions in the squadron, so I was put on the list to go home. And so I then was assigned, you know, an airplane and given a crew to fly home with that was already high in missions.
Why would they want to send pilots to the Middle East?
They needed, you know, Japanese war, yeah.
Oh, okay, so they were talking. So those people would have been ferrying aircraft further into the Pacific theater. They would have been going that way.
Yeah, and they were just training, you know,
Okay.
at that particular time. I didn't have to enter into that because I was going to go home. So I started flying home in June then of 45.
So really, from August 22nd,
Yeah.
44,
Mm-hmm.
to June 45.
Yeah, or till May of,
May of 45.
Yeah.
That was your time.
that was my combat time, then I got the 58
And
missions.
yeah, so it's really considering the short time period, a lot of missions in that short a period of time. So
Well, you know, again, the most missions of anybody that I ever flew was one friend of mine that was in the 340th, and he flew 102 missions. Now, as far as I know, that was the tops of any bomber pilot in World War II. Would have been.
and that was in your group, so to speak.
No, that would have been in the whole war.
No, but I say he flew out of your group.
Yeah, my bomb wing consisted of 3 groups,
Okay.
and he was in one of those 3.
Okay.
I didn't know him in combat at all. The same thing, Deke Slayton, one of the original 7 astronauts,
Right.
he was in my bomb wing also.
I see.
And I never knew him until after the war, of course. And so it was.
Wouldn't they at some point tell a pilot that's enough? Or how did they
Well,
judge?
that
how did
was
they
one of
judge
the
that?
one of the jobs of the flight surgeon.
Okay.
And I remember the one guy, you know, he was a character, and he would look at the flight surgeon, and we didn't have butter, but we had like jelly or something of that nature. and he'd butter his toast, look at the doc and slap it up against the side of his face, things like that. And the doc would just shake his head, Dr. Hamilton. And, but like I mentioned earlier about the one guy that he didn't want to fly. Well, we had a football game that the 5th Army against the 12th Air Force. And I wasn't involved in that. I was heavy flying combat then. But he'd gone and played football. And the doc had grounded him already. He had 45 missions or so in. And the doc, he was flak happy enough, the doc had grounded him. And so the doc said, if you can play football, you can fly more missions. So, and then he didn't want to fly as a first pilot anymore, so then he flew a couple missions with me, and he couldn't stand that, and he flew a couple missions with Bill Morton, and couldn't stand that, so then he put him back. But he was the one that supposedly ate a cigarette on the bomb run,
Okay.
and then made him very sick, of course. That's all conversation, but
Yeah, but there's a little difference between playing football out in that field and enjoying yourself, I guess.
yeah.
Okay, so June 45, you're flying back to the States, and you are going to ferry a B-25 back.
Yes,
And you're going to go roughly in the opposite direction that you came over,
yes,
and you're going to end up in West Palm Beach again.
yes,
And then you took the aircraft up to Savannah.
yes,
But in reading part of your bio, I found out that actually your military service was pretty extensive after that. You were not getting discharged
yeah.
anytime
So,
soon.
yeah, then following that, I went home for 30 days. And then I went back to Greensboro, North Carolina for reassignment. And from Greensboro, I was assigned to Pampa, Texas as a flight instructor. So after I got to Pampa, the war ended in Japan. So the training in Pampa was discontinued right away. And so then I was sent to Childress, Texas, which was a bombardier training school that had many small twin engine airplanes that they trade bombardiers with. And so primarily they were moving those airplanes to Victoria, Texas, where they were putting them in mothballs. And so it was one of my jobs to fly down and pick up those pilots with the B-25 and fly back. So my logbook will show quite a few trips to Victoria, Texas. And then we got done with that, and that base started closing at Childress. So then I was sent to Midland, Texas. At Midland, Texas, I had the unfortunate thing of playing on 3 basketball teams at one time. In other words, that was kind of a replacement depot for me, and that's about all I did. I flew enough, to maintain my flight pay and that sort of thing. But from there then, that I wasn't there too long, but 2 months maybe. I was sent to Lowry Field in Denver, Colorado.
Okay, so what time of the year then were you going from Texas to Colorado?
That would have been the spring of '46.
Okay.
And let's say early spring of '46, March maybe. And so when I got there, then I went through what they called commanding officer school as a captain. They were, going to give me some kind of a job. And as I completed that, in my history, it showed that I'd played ball in school and that sort of thing. So I was made director of physical training at Buckley Field, Colorado. That was the other field at Denver outside of Lowry. And so then my background in there was limited, as far as being a commander of that sort of thing. So then I was sent for 3 weeks to San Antonio, Texas, to commanding officer school. And one incident, when you've asked about incidents that I had there, we did a lot of pool work then. So they put us in a barracks, and I think, maybe there were 20 of us, I can't remember. But we just had the old army blankets, and of course, in the sun and coming from the northern area, sunburn and things like that with bathing suits on so much. And the guys, where I was the ranking officer there, then they made me head of the barracks. So they see if you can get us some sheets. And so I went to supply, and there were a bunch of people standing in line, and I was standing in line with them with my bathing suit on. And this first sergeant came out, "Soldier, you get your uniform on and report back to me immediately." You know how GIs are bitching in line and that sort of thing, and so he was thinking maybe I was one of the bitchers, I don't know. But so I went back and got my captain's uniform on, and you know, I got those sheets pretty easy. I didn't give him a bad time about it all, because you know, I know what was bothered him. But that was an incident that was kind of fun, but we got the sheets right away then. And so I was there 3 weeks, and then came back to Denver, to Lowry Field, to Buckley Field then, as director of physical training. So that my office was in the gym, so I, you know, ran the program from there. You know, with physical training, there was an awful lot of, like, I had bombardiers, navigators that were under me there that were giving PT to people then with different squadrons around, and we, you know, you had to schedule all that kind of thing. But primarily then, I played baseball on the team, and we played all the college teams around there, and then we were in what they called the Western Service League. So I was there till midsummer, and midsummer then Buckley Field started closing. So that was the end of our baseball program. So I had to hang around there, I suppose, for another month, checking out everything, you know, you have to do, like equipment. I sent baseballs and bats back to Hayward and Stone Lake, and had to account for where everything went, you know, this and that. And of course, baseball bats, it's easy to lose in balls. But one case I had where we had sweat jackets, and for some reason the commander was very interested in whatever happened to those sweat jackets. Well, you realize people were getting out of the service at that time then, so everybody took their sweat jacket home with them pretty much when they left, you know, but it was still part of the program. So I had to figure out that one of the lockers had been broke into and they got stolen, so they accepted that then. So anyhow, from there on, then I was moved to, and this would be getting into the fall then, late fall, moved to Boca Raton, Florida as director of physical training. And
Now that puts you in about 2 years at that point, doesn't it? 2 years into service?
4 years.
Oh, 4 years
Yeah, I
into
went in
service.
October of 42 and I got out in November, at the end of November of 46. So I was in 4 years and 2 months roughly.
So we forget about the, you look at the Italian campaign and you're not getting a big picture of this.
Well,
thing.
you missed the beginning, Dick. He
Okay.
trained for over a year to get there.
Just get there, yeah, okay.
Yeah, I soloed an airplane in 1943 and I flew my first combat mission in 44 August. So
Yeah.
I was roughly 11 months, or 13 months
Okay,
between starting training and
Okay.
flew my first mission.
Well, Hod, then, okay, so now we're getting near the end. So now you're in Florida?
Yeah.
Okay.
At Boca Raton, Florida. I got to tell you one of my experiences at Boca Raton, and I should,
What do you want?
my old military logbook. Maybe it's in here. Let's see.
Is it,
It big. That's no,
that's photos?
no.
Oh, the big, is it, not this,
Let's
that's
see.
pictures. Here, I'll just put it over to you. Here.
Oh,
Well, it's just, it's cold big.
yeah. No,
Unfortunately,
it
it's
is.
mostly water, but.
Yeah, here it is. Here it is. This is my military logbook.
yeah. Sorry,
Here we go.
that's one of those things that we have to be capable of doing.
This is all being taped, so be careful.
on October 6th of 1946 that I was in a hotel room in West Palm Beach, Florida, listening to the World Series, as you realize, before television. Listening to the World Series, and they announced on the radio all pilots returned to the field immediately. There was a hurricane moving in and we had to evacuate all the airplanes. Okay, so I got back and in the B-25s, this was at Boca Raton, Florida then,
Right.
the base. I got back there and all the B-25s that had been on the base were gone. They gave me a B-17. I had never flown a 4-engine airplane. I had never been in a B-17. And here's a hurricane moving in. The wind was blowing like, 30 knots and raining cats and dogs. By the time that I got all ready to go, it was, where am I here? It was 9:40 at night. So taking off in the dark, flying an airplane I'd never been in before, and in that kind of weather. And so I took off, and of course the minute of liftoff I was on actual instruments and climbed up through the stuff, and then I was sent to Scott Field at St. Louis, to Scott Field at St. Louis.
Oh, you flew, that was quite a long flight though.
At 5 hours and 35 minutes.
And did you have a co-pilot with you?
Yeah.
And a navigator or no?
No navigator, just the co-pilot and a flight engineer. And the co-pilot and I were both totally green on a B-17, but the crew chief knew his airplane beautifully.
So what did you think? What did you think of the B-17 then?
Well, I think that God wasn't my co-pilot, he was my pilot.
Wow.
You can just imagine not knowing anything about the airplane,
And flying.
never having flown 4-engine, to take off in the worst conditions you could think of,
In instrument conditions.
Yeah,
It was in a hurricane coming in, Dick.
and
Was it rough too? Rough air or just blowing like crazy?
blown hard, but I don't recall being too rough. And we climbed over, got over an overcast. And one of the things that was totally foreign to me was the supercharger system on a B-17 compared to a B-25, you see. And so the crew chief knew all how to handle that kind of thing. But starting the engines, see, I'd never been able to start the engines without him in there. And so we flew to St. Louis then that night. And the way I'm coming up with time looking in here, it shows 2 hours and 20 minutes. And that would take us to midnight. And then 3 hours and 15 minutes after that to St. Louis. And so we spent, and the World Series, I forget, did I say I was listening to the World Series?
Yeah.
Okay, then the World Series was in St. Louis,
Oh, boy. So
Yeah.
you were listening on the radio?
in Florida.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
And the next day ended up in St. Louis.
Okay.
But we didn't go to the game. We had to stay on the base. But that would have been 46 then when the Cardinals beat the Red Sox.
Okay.
When Enos Slaughter was on first base and the guy got a single and he went all the way around.
Oh, really? And
Johnny-
Scored on a single?
Yeah.
Must have been mighty fast.
He was a pilot. He was in pilot training, not with me, but when I was, training too.
Slaughter was?
Yeah, but then he washed out, so he
Okay.
never made it. But he was back, of course, with the Cardinals then, then I noticed here on October
Were these,
9th.
excuse me, I'm sorry for interrupting, were these guys, where the draft was on? Were a lot of these pilots drafted?
No, I would say an awful lot of pilots enlisted.
Okay.
Yeah, that was kind of a choice place to be, and
As opposed to letting the military draft you, right?
Yeah.
You'd rather, if you wanted to not.
Well, give you an example. You had to have your mother and dad sign for you for pilot training, and as cadet training in the other Bombardier Navigator 2. And my mother, of course, was very afraid to sign, and my dad, you know, the way he explained to her, you know, well, maybe if he doesn't, he'll end up in the infantry.
Yeah,
And why not do something you think you'd like to do, you know? And so this is a way that
I see.
convinced my mother. But what was your next
Well,
question?
I was just gonna go to the, you're
you had
getting
something
your,
else on your log here you were going
Oh,
to.
yeah. On the 9th, then I see where I flew back to Florida again. And that took me 5 hours and 5 minutes then to fly back. And then in November, I flew to New York with a C-47 or DC-3 and played basketball against Mitchell Field at New York. Played 2 games and then flew back from there on the 10th. No, flew back. Well, it chose both on November 7th, but after we stayed overnight. So anyhow, and then I flew a couple more times in Florida in a B-25, and then it shows on November 25, closed separation. That was the end.
November 25,
Yeah,
1946.
yeah,
Now, is that your entire military logbook there?
yeah.
And that's the form?
Outside of primary.
Okay.
Yeah, primary was with a regular logbook that you would be familiar with.
Wow. That is an interesting how they put that together. More like a
Yeah.
folio.
Now, Hod, was there an opportunity to re-enlist?
Here's what happened with me. When I got back then from overseas and was instructing at Pampa, then I flew up there with a couple students. Jack Spalding operated a flying service then at Middleton, Wisconsin. Now Jack Spalding is a guy I spoke of that your dad first flew with, and so I went to see him then to see if he had any kind of a job as I got out. And of course, that was one of those government schools that was closing then, so they had nothing. But North Central, Wisconsin Central Airline was starting then. And so he said when that got a little further along, he'd send me some information on it. Well, as time went by, then that still at Pampa, I heard from him, and he wanted me to have a picture and be fingerprinted, you know. And in the meantime, as you shoot the bull around the barracks, the idea is why get tied up with some little airline, you know, why don't you check out the big stuff? And so we did. And I was making $400 a month then as a captain. The airlines, anybody that came back, you start with the airlines as a co-pilot. And of course, at that time, you got about $165 a month as a co-pilot on the airline. And, you know, looking back, you didn't see the expansion of the airline. You thought, you know, might sit there 5-6 years before you got to be a captain, you know. And so then I signed up to stay in the service at the $400 a month until June of 1947. Okay, so the Congress cut the funds drastically for the Air Force. So that's where in November of 1946 that they let me out then.
Did they give you a choice, or did they just say they didn't?
You're done.
You're done.
Yeah, I was in the reserve, you know, and then I got the promotion to a major in the reserve. So I was in a position, if I got called back in, that I'd go back in as a major.
So you stayed in the reserve, but you couldn't continue with active duty just because they were downsizing
Yeah,
the military.
yeah,
But they didn't disband the Air Force, because you said there were guys like Deke Slayton who had been flying with you, and they must have continued with the Air Force. How did they manage to stay
no,
in?
Dick,
You mean the astronaut?
yeah, he got to be, he became a civilian.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, and then he went to got an engineering a degree out of the University of Minnesota.
Okay.
And then he made application for the astronaut program.
So-
See, those guys weren't in the military,
I
they were all
gotcha.
civilians.
But how, my God, the Air Force still had to have a core, a small
Oh,
core.
sure they
How
did.
do they maintain that core without guys like you?
Well, to give you an example, when the orders came through that I was to be separated, the commanding officer of the base that I was at Boca Raton sent a special telegram to training headquarters at St. Louis to try to keep a group of us in, and he wasn't successful.
I see.
And we were kind of key personnel, you know, and so that's just the way they operate.
Okay.
Well, okay, but Hod, when the war ended, you were actually in a situation where did you have mixed feelings, thinking, hey, the war's over, I sort of want to go back to civilian life, and I want to get out. Were you okay with continuing in the Air Force and continuing as a pilot and as a military pilot?
Well, you know, you had mixed emotions. You know, in combat, you reached a pillar in your life that it's hard to approach in civilian life. Like when I came back from combat after being a lead pilot, you know, and then back to the States, you were just another dumb pilot, you know. And like at Denver, for instance, when I got there, the commanding officer at Denver used me a few times to fly to Scott Field at St. Louis. Okay, then I ended up one
Here we
time.
Yeah, well, we're still going here, Dick. Unless you
Okay, that's it, yeah.
do you want do you
No.
want another tape?
I don't, unless you want yet
Okay,
another.
let's hold that. I'm gonna put this on
I don't have
standby.
another tape.
I do have one though.